Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much again for liking, commenting, and subscribing. I just want to say I'm pretty vocal about the fact that I have a therapist. I believe that, and let me say that I am also a pastor's wife. A lot of you guys know that. I'm actually a pastor myself. But there's days, if I'm being honest, where I struggle to even think if this conversation is not useless, but if it's even doing anything. I have people tell me, oh, you talk about race so much, you're doing nothing but, causing the divide and driving the divide. And I hear that talk so much, and honestly, it's discouraging because I do feel like that this conversation is necessary. Today, I wanted to talk about what made me feel prompted and gained my passion to talk about not only the race conversation, but also talk about racial inequalities and things that people experience of different races and how that even came about. I said the therapist part in the beginning was because I met with my therapist yesterday, and she was just encouraging me like, this is what we need to hear. This is what we need to hear. This is what we need to be told, be taught. We need to constantly, if we're going to be in this fight, we need to constantly keep this talk going, keep it at the forefront. I don't talk about politics on this channel. The only time I implement politics on my YouTube channel is when it specifically, directly affects race. That's the only time that I talk about it. When it pertains directly and directly impacts race. I don't go on, I'm not here to bash any political party, any president, because I feel like this talk about racism and about becoming anti-racist is not political. Hopefully we can all agree that whether you are Republican or Democrat, that racism is an issue. Hopefully we can agree that whether you're Republican or Democrat, that we should feel like there should be equality in race. And I know what some people are thinking, like, well, we all have the same opportunities. We all have the same laws, the same opportunities, the same everything. I always think about something when I think about racial inequalities and in that conversation. If you're right-handed, the world is essentially created for us, right-handed people. It is. The world is created for the people who are right-handed. It's scissors, can openers, a desk in schools, even the mouse that we use to operate our computer. It's all created for right-handed people. Surely you can find a left-handed one, but I've never tried to look for anything left-handed. I always think about this. When you're left-handed and you go to use a right-handed, you go to use their scissors or use a regular scissors, they're not even called right-handed scissors. They're called scissors, right? You have left-handed scissors and you have scissors. When you go to use their scissors, you have to operate how you do things, how you live your life around right-handed scissors. So when you go to cut, it's not that you don't have those same tools, it's that the tools weren't made for you to use. And that's the best way I can describe racial inequalities in America, in our country, disparities. We see it in healthcare, we see it in housing, we see it in so many areas, law enforcement. It's not that those tools, that I can't use those tools, is that the tools weren't created for me to use, if that makes any sense. So it was kind of after Trayvon Martin had happened in Sanford, Florida, and that's where I lived, in Sanford. And I remember learning about the stand your ground, things, in regards to that particular case. And I couldn't understand why this person was still able to walk free after he just murdered this teenager. It didn't make sense to me, where you have a person that was walking in his own neighborhood, his father, that was his neighborhood, and he was shot and killed in his neighborhood because he fit a certain description. And I remember sitting back and thinking, like, something is wrong here. Like, this isn't right. And then that was when the Black Lives Matter movement started. And I started to research and look up the things that were happening to the Black community when it came to law enforcement. And then I would try to speak up sometimes, but then normally I would get kind of shut down. Like if I said something like about Trayvon Martin on Facebook, people would be like, oh, it's about race. And it just wasn't a fight that I was willing to fight at that time. And I knew that fighting that fight was probably going to cost me people in my life, going to cost me friends maybe. Hasn't quite yet, but I just figured it might. Well, at least I don't know if it did. So I knew that talking about those things were going to cost me. I knew that growing up, I wanted to own a home. I knew that, I was married. I'm married to a Black person, and so a Black man. And so I knew we were going to have Black children. And it wasn't really until I had my son when I held him, my daughter too, but more so my son, because I remember how I felt when the Trayvon Martin incident happened. I remember how I felt, and I just thought, well, if we live in a nice area, or if we own a home in a place, if we live somewhere, how do my kids, my son in particular, my husband, how do they not be a threat? How do I make my son not look like a threat? I don't know if you've seen my husband. I'll put a picture here, but my husband is 6'1", and he's like 230, 240 pounds. He's not a small guy, okay? And whether people want to believe it or not, a different change in wardrobe in my husband looks like a threat. That shouldn't be the case. I know so many things play into implicit bias, and I talk about that in my implicit bias video, but so many things play into the implicit bias that we have when we see someone, how they're dressed, how they talk, how they act. But it still shouldn't matter when it comes to someone not committing a crime, being innocent in that aspect, in that time frame in time. And those things shouldn't matter. It shouldn't cost them their life. I thought about, well, when my son becomes 17, I have to ask him not to wear a hoodie. And for some people, it may not be that big of a deal. But to me, I'm like, how do I tell my son if it's cold outside not to wear a hoodie? How do I tell my son or my daughter, make sure you don't look threatening. Make sure you talk a certain way. I didn't really understand why my dad really beat into my sister and I, how we spoke. And obviously, you have what I know now as AAVE, or African American Vernacular English. But my dad was always so adamant about us speaking proper English. I didn't even understand why, because I thought it was proper English, and people always associated that with, oh, you talk white, right? But what is even that? What is talking white? That's not even a thing, right? All because you may enunciate your words doesn't mean you talk a color. You can't talk a color. And so having kids really prompted me to do this, to talk about race, to talk about those things, but not only for my kids, but for the next generation. If we look and see injustice happening around us in any aspect, how can we go on and not care? How can we go on and see injustice happening in any aspect and say, well, it doesn't directly affect me, so it's not that big of a problem because it doesn't impact my life directly? I honestly, like I said before, have been convicted in a sense in that aspect, like with the kids at the border. I'm obviously a Black woman. I really didn't pay attention much to what was happening at the border really until this year, where I started to learn what was happening and started to see these women that were having hysterectomies against their will, seeing these kids that are separated from their parents. And this is not in Did Obama start it? Did Trump start it? Because quite frankly, it doesn't matter who started it. We have to figure out a solution to where these poor kids and these women aren't being mistreated. That's just my personal take on it. But like I said, I was convicted because if anybody knows me, I do talk about abortion a lot and giving women the tools to choose the option for life for their babies because of my experience and my abortion that I experienced. I personally felt convicted because I cannot just be willing to talk about this injustice and completely ignore the other ones. And with the death penalty, people that are going to jail or that have been to jail, been in jail for 30, 40 years, and they're wrongfully convicted. Black people that go to jail for murder and they're 7 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted. That was an injustice to me. And it got me to look deeper into racial issues and how our race, something we don't choose, something that we can't choose, plays a factor, a major factor in the society around us, where we have things happening that we can't prevent from happening solely based on our race. I always talk about we feel the effects of redlining still to this day. I promise you I'm going to do a video on redlining soon. It may be my next video, but I'm going to do a video on redlining soon. So I keep mentioning it, but I've never done a video. So you guys are probably like, what is she talking about? What is redlining? But how redlining still affects us today. How the wealth gap between white and black families still affects us today. How the school to prison pipeline is affecting us today. And how those things, how we could see the difference in, which any epidemic is terrible, but we could see the difference on how the crack epidemic looked in one place and how the opioid epidemic looks now. We can see the treatment different. That was criminalized. They didn't get help that they needed. Opioids are not necessarily criminalized like it was with crack. People can get the help that they need now. Long story short, that is why I started talking about these things, because I felt like I could not sit idly by and talk this big game about abortion, but turned a blind eye to all the other people that are struggling with the injustices that we face today. Thank you so much for liking and subscribing and being here on this journey with me. And I know that, like I always say, these conversations will start at the table. They will start and we will talk and we will break these walls down where we feel we have to be on some sort of defense and not be defensive, but start to have empathy. And so you guys are amazing. I love you. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Have a great day. Bye.